Good morning, Madam Chair, Supervisors, and Mr. Huckleberry. I'm Kevin Kavitsky, and thank you again for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Pima County Deputy Sheriff's Association and the Fraternal Order of Police. I received a memorandum provided by Mr. Huckleberry and Mr. Burke. I believe a large portion of my talking points were taken out of context, and I would like to clarify. Issue 1 under holiday pay. It is not the intention, nor has been the intention of the Pima County Deputy Sheriff's Association or the Fraternal Order of Police wanting holiday pay for both the observed and the actual holiday in a year. We are asking for equality in the pay given to patrol deputies. As Mr. Burke describes on page 2, paragraph 1 of his memorandum, it states that, quote, most county employees do not work on a holiday and are paid an 8-hour holiday benefit, unquote. This means that they get Friday or Monday off and it's paid at 8 hours. In situations where an employee does not have to work on an observed holiday, the employee is paid 8 hours of holiday benefit plus 8 hours of time and a half. This means the employee who works an observed holiday will be paid the equivalent of 20 hours. What this does not cover is the employee that has Friday or Monday, the observed holiday, off as a regular day off, but has to work the actual holiday at straight time on Saturday. This employee would be paid the 8 hours of holiday benefit for Friday and 8 hours straight time for Saturday, totaling 16 hours. This is short 4 hours of premium pay and becomes unequal among the deputies. This discriminates between what deputies' work assignments are, benefiting some and not all. The scenarios described in Mr. Burke's memorandum on page 2, paragraph 3 clearly shows the inequality. A jurisdictional chart was provided by Mr. Burke comparing 12 jurisdictions, of which 11 responded. Out of the 11, Mr. Burke stated that only 8 recognized the observed holiday, while 3 recognized the actual holiday. This graph does not accurately depict all conditions of work, and I was able to contact 7 of the 8 jurisdictions that recognized the observed holiday and 1 of the 3 that recognized actual holidays. Of the 7 of the 8 recognized observed holidays, all 7 indicated that the observed holiday only applied to civilian staff, and the officers received one or the other based on what they worked, or they provided some other level of compensation for the holiday, such as 8 hours of vacation added to their bank. Of the 1 out of 3 that recognized the actual holiday, that agency found a similar issue with unfairness in reverse of how Pima County does it, and they are in negotiations to fix that situation as we speak. Issue 2, complaints relating to alternative time punches. Mr. Burke refers in the memorandum on page 3 under issue 2, paragraph 1, that timekeeping records must be complete and accurate, and that the county is subject to both civil and criminal penalties for failing to maintain such records. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has never had an issue with timekeeping that resulted in civil or criminal penalties. This is due to the integrity of the employees and the employees signing off on hours submitted when they verified and then verified by a supervisor prior to handing it over to finance. This was done using a paper system, TAS, that produced a lot more errors than ADP. The ADP system is a great and needed system. It would benefit all that use it if it is understood that certain restrictions hinder certain operations. On page 5, paragraph 1, under accountability, transparency, and role of a manager, Mr. Burke advises that the Pima County trusts its employees and relies upon all of its employees to accurately report hours. However, in the next sentence, says that only a manager should make changes to a time card when an employee requests the changes that aren't reflected. When an employee submits changes to a supervisor, those changes are entered in by the supervisor based on recollection and trust of that employee's hours. The true checks and balances come at the end of a pay period when the employee approves their own time card. This is the employee saying that everything is correct. It is then that the supervisor's responsibility to look over the hours and approve the employee's approval. If questions arise, then the supervisor can verify hours by checking with staff, looking at recorded radio histories, or checking GPS function on cell sites. So the current approval process does give the accountability through ADP, just as the signature did on paper over the last 3 decades. Under page 4, problem 1, Mr. Burke suggests that the problems associated with phone applications could be lessened if non-field units relied on desktop computers or time clocks to punch in. Again, this would create just as many issues because there are many times during a week of work that detectives stop out with the public or respond straight to a scene for a call or have other duties and require investigations away from centralized position. Perspective. If you have a supervisor who has a squad of 12 deputies under them, and the average deputy spends 2 hours a week addressing punch issues with their supervisor, This equates to a total of 24 hours of a whole day lost in productivity. Add in the 3 hours spent by a supervisor and it's born. Same squad over a month is 4.5 days of productivity lost. The way that ADP stands in Pima County now, and based on the perspective being given, a deputy who is not clocked in that comes across an accident and stops to assist that is not clocked in and is injured or killed presents an argument for the county as to whether or not that deputy was in fact working when the accident occurred. This is based on the rigidity of the clock in and clock out practice. With autonomy, this suggests a less rigid base and allows for a deputy to make split-second decisions with the assumption that an individual can make a later correction. The bottom line is that there needs to be equality with holiday pay among all patrol deputies, and that there is in fact a checks and balance process with the existing approval process in ADP. Time spent away from the community and your constituents is a concern, and you have the ability to vote and change this so that deputies and supervisors can be doing what they need to do for the public. This is a county-wide issue. I am asking that Mr. Huckleberry, Mr. Burke, and the Board of Supervisors address this issue by October 6, 2015 to come to a resolution rather than prolong these outcomes so that the normal operation of the Pima County Sheriff's deputies can resume. I will be happy to return and address any issues to help resolve this by that date. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And I also am in receipt of a memo from, actually a letter from Sheriff Nanos dated September 14th, 2015 to Mr. Huckleberry, also addressing the issues of holiday benefit and holiday pay. The point that the sergeant just made is reflected in also in Sheriff Nanos' letter to Mr. Huckleberry, that the current policy gives preference to those departments and employees working a traditional 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 schedule. Sheriff Nanos addresses admin's concern with time accounting issues, indicating that supervisory oversight is fundamental to the accountability system. But what he is asking is that deputy sheriffs are commissioned law enforcement officers and cannot ignore a possible DUI driver, a vehicle collision, or a stranded motorist that they may encounter whether they are clocked into ADP or not. In that regard, he's requesting two things. First, it is clear that ADP is a mobile application, is flawed and needs to be fixed so that it can be utilized more efficiently than it has since ADP went live 10 months ago. Second, he is requesting approval to allow his line level staff make adjustments to their own time cards, which I think the sergeant has also suggested. And apparently Sheriff Nanos has been in contact with ADP staff. He's indicated that ADP has said that this feature is available through ADP, and that our county chose not to set it up that way, and that central administration, meaning here, not the sheriff's office, has been resistant to this request. And so those were his concerns that seem to be very reflective of what the sergeant had just brought to our attention. I have, the sheriff was unable to be here today, but he sent Captain David Thiel and Captain Harold James to answer any questions this board may have in regard to the ADP issues that were just raised. And I have two other speakers, Deputy Steve West and Chris Hogan. If anybody, at this point, does anybody have questions for the sergeant?
Madam Chair.
Supervisor Miller.
The question I have is, you're saying that when you had a paper system, that you were able to correct, or the deputies were able to correct their paper filings that they turned in. They were able to correct those prior to turning in.
Supervisor Miller, just a second. Anybody who has their phones, they need to put them on mute. In respect for the speakers. Supervisor Miller, proceed.
they were able to make those corrections on the paper system, correct? Without having to go back to their supervisor and saying, can you make the correction and approve the correction? Is that the way it worked on the paper system?
Correct. They would fill out the paper system, and at the end of the pay period, just like an ADP, they would sign it, and then signing it saying that it's correct.
Okay.
That's to their knowledge, and then the supervisor would go over it, and then the supervisor would sign it.
So the supervisor, so what the issue is here is they're having to do this on a daily basis in the electronic system that they're not getting, because I'm not quite clear on what the issue is.
In the electronic system, and I can give you examples, but in the electronic system, if the employee makes an error or their phone doesn't allow them to clock in correctly, they can't go in and fix that.
Okay.
They've got to tell their supervisor to fix it, then that takes me out, and I have to go and address that. Those
And the question then becomes, is that a good use of supervisor time?
Right, right. And how long has this been going on?
For the 10 months that we've had this system.
For 10 months, and this hasn't been addressed with the staff in IT?
We've addressed this many times through HR in downtown, and we've been told that the system's not changing.
Okay, okay. And so what the feature is that, what is the feature that is available that we have not implemented? What is the feature to allow deputies to do, actually correct their own time card?
The autonomy to be able to correct their own time cards and make changes along within their time card is available through ADP.
Okay,
It's
so
an
just
application that
access.
is available and is being used by other organizations.
It's just an access privilege to be able to go in and do that. Right now, it's the supervisor that has access to that. Okay, I'm just curious why we're resistant to this, if this is the way that we did it previously, and why there's been, why it hasn't been addressed and fixed, because it seems to me that the supervisor is approving the final.
The employee approves it, and then the supervisor
Right.
goes back and approves it.
So, okay, this doesn't make sense to me that this has been reverted back to an old, well, it isn't even the old system, it's imposing restrictions that weren't there before.
Correct.
So, yeah, it doesn't seem.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is that timekeeping shouldn't be time consuming.
Well, yeah, and it seems like, as he said, a whole lot of productivity is being wasted on having to go back, a supervisor having to go back and correct somebody's time card. So I agree with you. I think this is something that we should be able to correct.
Madam Chair.
Okay, Supervisor Elias and Supervisor Carroll.
Madam Chair, I'd like to hear a response to that question.
I'm sorry.
No,
Not from you, from staff. Mr. Berg? Mr. Leamy?
Madam Chair, members of the board, to understand the situation, it's important to understand what the county used to do. Historically, the county did a paper timekeeping system that did not require employees to clock in or out during the day. At the end of it, near the end of the pay period, on the Wednesday at the end of pay, the second week of pay, employees would record what they say they worked on each of the days and estimate the next 2 or 3 days what they thought they would work, and then submit the paper system. The county would then key in all those systems, all those timesheets into the payroll system to pay the employee. The following week, we processed several thousand corrections because people were guessing what their actual times were at the end of the pay period. So what happened is, in the past, employees did not have to clock in and clock out. They just had to report what their total hours were at the end of the pay period. Typically, I don't know about the sheriff's deputies, but throughout the county, most people completed their time sheets once at the end of the pay period, rather than daily as they came and went. What ADP does, and what most time capture systems would do if we were to replace ADP, is capture the time as employees begin work and as they end work. Because we're required to pay them for the hours they work and to pay overtime if they work more than the 40 hours per week. So trying to compare what was done for 3 decades with a paper system that was basically guesswork about how many hours we worked versus...
How is it not guesswork now?
Or they're doing it
Sorry.
online.
I can answer that question,
Yeah.
if I may. The sheriff's department did operate using the paper system, but they did it different from the rest of the county. We were 1 pay period ahead, so we weren't predicting our times. Our times that we were submitting were actual hours that had already been worked. So that's the paper trails that we were creating for us. We were always 1 pay period behind as far as the paperwork being turned in. As we move to the ADP system, we are now with the rest of the county online at the same exact time. But again, it comes back down to the Monday of the payroll, when an employee approves his time card, he's saying it's correct.
So, Mr. Burke, how is, I mean, if they're doing this, if they're logging in and doing this on a daily basis, it seems to me this would be even more accurate and reflect their actual hours on a daily basis. I guess I don't understand why now we're not trusting the employee with this clocking in and clocking out. And I do understand the issues with the application on their cell phones that doesn't work very well. So I guess that's the part I'm missing, is why now we don't believe that it's should be entrusted to them when it was previously.
Madam Chair, Supervisor Miller, the situation is in almost every payroll capture, time capture system, employees are supposed to record their time as it happens. If they come back later and say, oh, that's not the real hours I work different hours, that usually requires a management level person to change the original time capture. So, it's permissible to let employees alter their original time records. It's just that there's no control over it. We're not saying we don't trust sheriff's deputies the same as we trust all county employees, but generally speaking, employees don't get to alter their actual time records. Time records are altered only with approval of management.
But he was talking about a really unique situation that the sheriff deputies have if they have a call.
And apparently ADP has the ability to be flexible, and we apparently don't. Supervisor Valadez, you're still seeing concern.
And let me try and summarize what the question is, because it hasn't been addressed really. What we're hearing today from the sergeant is that in the past, in the paper system, and I understand the time capture, that's a separate issue from what we're trying to talk about. In the past, when they made a mistake, they were able to submit a request with just the signature of the deputy, and that request would be looked at and adopted, and at the end of the pay period would be reconciled. Now, that's what we're hearing right now. If that's the case, and I'd like to hear as to whether or not that's the case in a little bit, if that's the case, then obviously we've gone away from a system where they could do that, and I think that's why we have some questions here. So first of all, if we could address whether or not that's the case. I mean, we're being told by Sergeant Kibitsky that that's the case. Is that different than what we did?
Madam Chair, Supervisor Valadez, yes, it is different. In the past, employees were not required to report time daily. They reported time at the end of the pay period. They basically summarized at the time they worked. Because we didn't have a time capture system, we had a paper system that was then manually keyed in at the end. So
Madam Chair, Mr. Burke, you're not answering the question.
You aren't answering the question at all. And you're repeating the same thing you just said.
But the difference in it, I'm trying to explain, Madam Chair and Supervisor Valadez, the difference. In the past, there was not a requirement to report time as it occurred. If the county wants to have them report time for a 2-week period without actually documenting as it occurs, and that is a way to do it. It's just that it's not very accurately.
Go ahead.
We're still not addressing the question we're asking. Mr. Huckabee, do you understand the question we're asking? Did you address the issue?
Could you repeat the question?
The question that we're asking is it's not a time capture question. We understand the issue. The issue is very simple. In the past, when they made errors, they submitted a request in writing. It was then accepted with just the employee's signature, and then was reconciled with the supervisor at the end of the pay period. It doesn't have to do with time capture at all. What we're asking is if that was the case. First of all, we're asking if that was the case. And secondly, if that was the case, why aren't we allowing them to do it going forward in the ADP system?
Madam Chair, Supervisor Valadez, in the past, the paper system allowed the supervisor to exercise judgment over whether or not the employee actually worked. My guess is we can probably do the same here if I'm reading what is being stated by the sheriff, but I'm not quite sure that's accurate. I think what you would need to understand, and I'm perfectly willing to have this resolved by October the 6th, because I think there are 3 things here. The first is we know the mobile data system that they had in the car And I've even heard a comment that we do have some deputies now using it, even though they're not supposed to. But the issue is the app doesn't work. We know that. And ADP now knows that. They're coming out with a new version even last Friday. We don't know if what they come out with is going to solve the problem. But we got to give it a shot. If you look at then the number of punch corrections within the Sheriff's Department, about 5,000, and this is when we looked at the last payroll and that material we have, were sheriff's deputies or someone in the field, a detective, and we understand that completely, that they don't have access to a central time clock or a computer. Now, maybe we could make the mobile data computer work, but we really have to check the security. And that's pretty bad as well right now. 4,000 corrections occurred in the corrections unit. Well, they're all reporting to a central location. They're using the mobile, apps, and they don't even need to and shouldn't be because they're wasting everybody's time. So I'm going to basically tell the sheriff to get everybody in the correction bureau to use a central time clock or the computer that's sitting at their desk. So that takes half of the problem away right away. We still are faced with the issue of mobile, the application. That has to get fixed, and I'm willing to give it till October the 6th to try and figure out how to fix it, and at the same time look at the autonomy. If we can get supervision, more autonomy in the Sheriff's Department to make those modifications. I'm fine with that as well. While I'm talking, let me also address the other issue that started this discussion, and that was the issue of holiday pay. And I think when we looked at the original request, we looked this up as that somebody's looking to get paid for both. We now understand the request since it's been clarified. We will look at that, and we will look at its cost implications countywide, and we'll be willing to come back and report to the board again on the 6th about what those costs are, what departments would incur those costs, and are those costs absorbable within the budget, as well as we do have a calendar of events for the balance of fiscal year to see if this situation occurred again.
Thank you, Mr. Huckleberry. Supervisor, who's next? I don't know.
I had a number of comments to make, but everybody seems like they want to talk, so I'm going to let them talk a little bit before I say anything.
You want to have the last word?
No, I don't say that. I just don't listen.
No, I guess, if I understood what Mr. Huckleberry said, at this point, we've got two issues. We've got the issue of holiday pay, and we didn't do, meaning central admin, didn't do our homework as we should have. That falls on us. We also have, as you know, ADP is a legacy system, which means it was designed for mainframe, and the mobile apps aren't working, so that falls to ADP. And what I see here as we have this discussion is I'm wondering why we needed to have this discussion, because apparently there has been internal discussion among sheriff's deputies, staff, and our staff. These issues should have been resolved, shouldn't have had to go to the board. I guess I have some concern that we're not very good at listening. We're talking at each other and not trying to work together. I mean, this is not a zero-sum game, guys. It's not somebody wins, somebody loses. We got to make it work for all of us so we can, the taxpayers, the residents of this community benefit. It's not just about us. So with that, I don't know, Supervisor Carroll?
Madam Chair, Mr. Kapinski, I'm first happy to hear that Sheriff Nanos has taken the bull by the horns and tried to get on the phone with ADP, tried to talk to Mr. Burke. I understand from Mr. Huckleberry that if we come back here on October 6th, you will have plenty of time to sit down at the table and discuss how to remedy this. I know that your sheriff, our county sheriff, has certainly addressed the point of new leadership, trying to correct some of the things that have been left unaddressed in the last few years. But I do believe that for you and I, if you need any help in getting these discussions off to a good start, I'd be happy to have a seat at the table with you. I believe that we should look at the opportunity to work with the sheriff's deputies. If we can trust them with guns and being able to take away people's freedoms, I think we can trust them with a time card. And secondly, I also believe that with the help of the sheriff, it could be addressed for the short term and the long term. You're not looking for any compensation for past hours. You're starting to, you're getting me nervous when that arises. But from this point on, you've been dealing with the system for 10 months. So from October 6th, I hope we can have some type of a remedy to at least put on the agenda for a future meeting to try to fix your problem. I do believe that you're accurate in the explanation. I do have, sometimes there is a communication gap, and I apologize for that. But I do want to offer my assistance to try to work this out so we can keep the morale of the Sheriff's Department as high as it is. We've not experienced any crisis or scandals in the Sheriff's Department about this issue. Not then, not now, not in the future I can predict. So I'm willing to sit down and be a part of your solution team if you'd like to invite me.
Well, the association and the FOP are willing to sit down and discuss.
Didn't we have some other speakers?
We did. Deputy West, did you have anything you wish to add at this point?
If I may.
Deputy West is with our search and rescue unit.
Okay, which again is another unique part of the Sheriff's Department. It's not a one-size-fits-all operation here.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning, Madam Speaker, Supervisors, and Mr. Huckleberry. My name is Deputy Steve West. I'm assigned to the Search and Rescue Unit and been with the department going on 16 years. I'm representing the Pima County Deputy Sheriff's Association. First of all, I'd like to start off by saying I'm not on the clock right now. I'm wearing my uniform. I'm wearing my uniform because my shift will start as soon as we finish up here. I'd like to discuss the ADP payroll system's login procedures and how I believe it impacts public safety and wastes taxpayer dollars. As a search and rescue deputy, I'm on call 24 hours a day, 5 days a week. When called out, it's imperative that I'm able to log into the ADP system and immediately proceed to my call. The procedure notifies the department that I'm on duty, along with all that encompasses. My concern is about the amount of time and the number of attempts it takes to log into the system. I will discuss an actual call-out situation that occurred a few weeks back. I was called out around 8 p.m. to a rescue in Madera Canyon. A male subject had fallen 80 feet off a cliff and could not feel his legs. I'm sitting in my driveway trying to log in and not able to do so. The system on the phone error reads, quote, "There is no local data for this feature. Please try again later when you are online," end quote. Knowing that there's a person in need, I proceeded without logging in. While en route, the system allows me to punch in. However, it's not the actual time that I started. I am now on scene working the extrication of the injured person. The call goes late into the night and I finish up about 3 a.m. As I attempt to clock out, I notice the system has clocked me out at midnight. The ADP system does not, the ADC system does this assuming I forgot to clock out. I now have to clock back in and wait a minute and clock back out so that I actually get a timestamp of when I finish my day. The next morning, I then have to proceed to a district office and prepare an amendment form explaining why my clock-in time was incorrect, why I clocked out at midnight, and why I clocked back in and back out at 3 a.m. My sergeant then has to go into my account, makes changes based on the amendment form. This same procedure must be followed every time a login error occurs within a 14-day pay period. He has to do this for 7 deputies. I've seen my supervisor take 3 hours to complete the payroll. I also want to stress that these issues are not just isolated to my unit. Other sergeants have far more than 7 deputies that they're responsible for, and they're all dealing with these same problems. The ADC system does not appear to be designed for employees with non-standard work hours or employees who are on call. There is the ability with an ADP system that would allow a deputy to amend his own entries pending final approval by a sergeant. I believe implementing this change will save the county time and money Deputies can respond in a more timely manner, and sergeants will have hours, it will save sergeants hours of unnecessary payroll entries. This will allow us more time to do what we were hired to do. That's all I have.
Thank you, that was very enlightening. Chris Hogan, did you want to speak? Chris?
Thank you for your time. I'm also a deputy sheriff here in Pima County. I'm in my 18th year with the department, 11 with the homicide unit. I'm the senior detective in the homicide unit. Let me start by saying that we understand the need to track employees even down to the minute, but we also track our time down to the minute. The app itself, if it worked correctly, wouldn't be bad. I was asked to speak last minute here, and they said to give a recent example. So I'll go back 3 days, Saturday. We got called out as a suspect was arrested by Glendale Police Department on a recent homicide here where a gentleman was burned in his car. Clocked on the clock at 3 o'clock to go to Glendale. And same thing as Deputy West, so of course I don't realize till later, midnight it clocks me out automatically. However, one of the things they've asked, my deputy had asked us to do is get a legal opinion from Mr. Weaver about are we covered, are we on the clock? So Saturday night at midnight, I'm off the clock for ADP. We're out of town, we're not checked on the radio in Glendale, Arizona. 2 o'clock in the morning, we take a suspect, we're with a civilian suspect driving in a county car. The Maricopa County Jail booking her in. If a Maricopa County deputy calls down here and says, is Detective Hogan on the clock? They're going to say, no, I have no idea where he's at. Call them if they can't get us on the phone in the jail. We don't know what happens. And that's just one example. It typically seems to do that, clock you out randomly, clock you in randomly. So we come back to Tucson at 4 in the morning, look at the phone. We're off the clock. What do I do at that point? Do I sit and wait for it to work? I mean, we're not here to steal from the county, clearly. But we also know that our time is valuable, especially when, as you can see, it's usually around outside of shifts, people working overnight, that kind of thing, that it never works. I do agree with Mr. Burke when he says that when it does work, essentially, there doesn't need to be any changes. People are being clocked out when they work 5 minutes over their shift because they get a phone call. It does need to be accurate. As far as, like Deputy West said, taking 5-10 minutes to clock on, you're not on the clock. We're not being paid for that. You should be, and we're not going to sit at the end for 10 minutes because that's incorrect too. So where is that time going? If the app is fixed, it's not an issue. But clearly, I think we all brought it up to our supervisors and management, and it hasn't been fixed. So basically, the deputies have asked about fixing the app, the legalities of not being on the clock and working, and have asked us for those issues to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Supervisor Elias.
You know, just wanted to comment, not wanting to have the last word in this because I think the last word's not going to come for a while. But in all candor, you know, this is a microcosm of the number of complaints we've heard about ADP from departments across the board.
You're not just talking sheriff, you're talking
All
central.
employees, and especially employees who have to be on call, especially employees who have critical jobs that must be done in order for the public safety to be assured. And that doesn't just include sheriffs. Although everything you say is true, and I respect the work that you do tremendously, and I was particularly, I thought Deputy West's comments were particularly thoughtful. So, ADP, I think, is an issue that we were probably not very well prepared for. And since that time, we have probably not implemented it very well and haven't been, well, we haven't been sitting with our ears open and listening to what our employees have to say to us. But that's not unusual. If you take a look at the next item on our agenda, it's an extension of the discussion of meet and confer memorandum of understanding to November 30th, 2015, and it should have been completed by June. So here we are again, not listening to employee groups with really the correct posture and the correct thinking in place. I think we should move forward, get this solved by October 6th, and move on and find out what other problems exist with ADP, and maybe decide if it's really a pathway we need to continue going down. The other thing I mentioned to you, because it's relevant, and Sergeant Kapinski, I agree with you completely. we can trust you guys, and this is about your integrity, and I understand that, and I trust your integrity. But the buddy punching scandal that we had over here with our kissing cousins at the city of Tucson should give us all pause to think, because they were never able to straighten out how much money was abused and gone due to buddy punching. So it is a very big deal. And it does go far deeper into the nature of county work than just the sheriff's department, but this is a good place to start, and it's a good thing to get it done by the beginning of October.
Thank you. Captain Thiel and Captain James, do you have anything you want to add at this point?
Good morning, I'm Captain James. I'm the Administrative Services Division Commander for the Pima County Sheriff's Department. I think we've already touched on the holiday issue, so I don't think that there's anything more that I could convey from our sheriff about that. It sounds like that's going to be taken care of. But in summary of the issue with ADP, it seems to be a system that is well developed. We like ADP, and I think it could actually work with some minor changes. But it seems to be a system that's developed more appropriately for a Monday through Friday type corporation. And I think the reason that we experience a lot of the issues that we experience is because we definitely are not that kind of corporation. ADP doesn't understand when someone works 8 to 4, clocks out at 4, and then at 5:30 gets called out and gets come back on, doesn't understand the midnight issue. And we can deal with some of those things, but what it comes down to, our main complaint is that with the philosophy of ADP being management and supervision driven down towards fixing corrections that need to be made because ADP doesn't understand some of those things, it causes our supervisors hours and hours of work to get those punches fixed and to make the time cards as accurate as possible because of the uniqueness of the 24/7, 365 type work that we do. And I know there's going to be other departments that would have that same kind of complaint, wastewater and different things, transportation. We just have a lot of employees working shift work, so I think that's why we experience most of the problems. And I do want to say that this has not been adversarial at all between us and finance and human resources. We communicate with them very well regularly to resolve problems. It's just that with the way that it is right now, with employees not being able to fix their own mistakes or issues that come up because of ADP, it causes a supervisor to do it, and that takes the supervisor away from supervising very serious and important work. And that's the main issue that we're having with ADP. Captain Thiel can speak more to, he's the patrol division commander, he can speak more to some of the things he's seeing in patrol, to having his sergeants removed from the field and how long they are actually removed. But I think that's the summary of what we're basically saying, that we could use ADP, and we agree that time needs to be accounted for accurately and appropriately. It's just that the way that the philosophy of it right now is kind of causing a lot of extra work for our supervisors, and they're not actually out there doing what we want them to be doing, which is the supervision of the law enforcement work. So,
thank you.
Madam Chair, Supervisors, Mr. Huckleberry, and Mr. Burke as well. We have 64 sergeants in the Sheriff's Department. If each sergeant spends 2 hours per pay period over a 26 pay period year, that means we would have spent over 3,300 hours just handling data entry for ADP. In other words, a whole sergeant and a half in our department spends time doing nothing but correcting ADP, and I think I'm being conservative in that estimate. And I understand Mr. Burke's concern about evidence and having trails. That's what we do when we build a criminal case. We build the evidence to make that case, and I understand that. But essentially, our sergeants are being reduced to being data entry clerks for a fund accounting system. And if you ask most of our sergeants about fund accounting, they'd look at you all squirrely and not understand, because they don't understand what they're doing is fund accounting data entry. So I want my sergeants out in the field. I don't want them sitting at a station where they have to have one computer set up, working on ADP, and having another our data entry system for our response to calls up, confirming data and reviewing data. I firmly believe that the app can be fixed. It's going to take some time. If I can use an app that gives me my favorite meal at a favorite restaurant, ready for me to pick up when I get there in 15 minutes. I'm sure that we can fix this as well. So I understand it's going to need patience, but my recommendation for all of our departments who rely upon the app is to give our employees the ability to make those corrections, who can do it knowing firsthand what they did, what they worked, make the corrections, allow the supervisors to provide that supervisory oversight and confirm what they need to when they need to, and move on. That's going to help us most in our response to the citizens and providing public safety. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Supervisor Miller.
I'd just like to ask a question. How much of the, it sounds like a lot of these corrections are being done because of errors with the system. It's not really, it seems like the number of corrections will go way down once we get the system from logging people out and that kind of thing.
I would say that's extremely accurate. The examples that Deputy West and Deputy Hogan gave are very exemplary of the different challenges we have when there's call out, we have to go to court on my day off, getting my on-call pay. I know that our K-9 unit is struggling getting their K-9 maintenance time accounted for properly. So once we get some of those figured out and working properly, the intervention on the part of our supervisory staff is going to go way down.
So it's not just the app. It seems like there's some issues with the way the system works that
Right.
needs to be corrected as well as the app.
Yeah.
So-
And I'm sure Mr. Burke can speak to that as well.
And that
because
would
it requires.
probably eliminate a huge amount of data entry and for everybody, even for the people that are doing it to correct their own time cards. It would, if they didn't get logged out, they wouldn't have that problem. So it'd be interesting to know what you're saying the vast majority are exactly that. So when you said 1.5 employees, sergeants spending time fixing errors that are happening because the system's kicking them out or logging them out, whatever. So it seems like those are two separate issues. They need to get the system working right, then also get the application working right. Thank you.
Supervisor Valdez, did you have?
Not to these fine gentlemen. I had some points to make and wanted some answers. The first question that I had, thank you, by the way.
Thank you.
The first question I had is to Mr. Weaver, and Tom, if you're not prepared to answer the following question, please let us know. One of the issues that was brought up was whether or not a deputy who is called out on duty but is unable to clock in, does he have off-the-clock liability, or technically because he is functioning as a peace officer is he covered?
I think they're covered if they're functioning as a police officer or a peace officer. ADP doesn't determine somebody's status. The law determines their status. So if they're working in law enforcement capacity, they're covered.
Okay.
And they should be paid as well.
You may want to get that in writing.
And that was my next point, by way of staff direction, if we could get a legal opinion that is available to the public as well on that point. The second question, or the second point that I had, it sounds like obviously we've had a fruitful discussion on some of the issues. I'm glad to hear Mr. Huckleberry's point on the holiday pay. I think that's on the way to being resolved. Also the issue of the corrections office and how we're going to deal with that. I'm absolutely willing to wait until October 6th to hear whether or not the new application on the phone actually works, because I actually got to see it firsthand and trying to watch the deputy try and punch out. And it took a good 15 to 20 minutes before he was even acknowledged, because it wasn't even, I even tried punching it myself a couple of times. So it clearly doesn't work. But by way of staff direction, I think it's, we've been on ADP for long enough at this point where we probably need to kind of do a debrief on that issue. And I would offer that as staff direction, that a stakeholder group needs to be put together and start looking at what works, because I'm sure there are things that work. Mr. Burke talked about the time capture. That's great, and that's a good thing for most departments. But we also need to know what doesn't work. And let's figure out, and let's make sure that a report comes back to this board through the administrator about the successes and things we need to work on, so that we are aware of what those issues are. And I also want to encourage SCIU to participate in submitting what issues you are aware of as well, because we really can't make it work if we don't know. So I offer that by way of staff direction at this point.
Okay. Supervisor Elias.
Just real briefly, the only thing I'd add to that, as direction, Supervisor Valadez, because I think you're hitting exactly the direction that I was thinking earlier too, but to make sure all our employee groups are included in that, because there's other ones aside from the Sheriff's Association and SEIU. But nevertheless, I think they all need to be included as well.
And and that's addressing, as Supervisor Miller indicated, the issues related to the mobile app, the GUI system, graphic user interface, as well as the technical issues regarding how we implemented ADP. But there's still one issue that is unrelated that has been raised, and that's the issue of holiday pay, which is, from my viewpoint, an issue that is a policy issue. How do we pay our deputies? How do we achieve that equity, parity, what equality, as we have, as other law enforcement organizations do. So both of these issues need to come back on October 6th.
Yeah, I was going to say, those issues can be dealt with, I think, by October 6th, to be quite honest. I think what Supervisor Valadez is suggesting is something that's going to take us several months to try and sort out, maybe by the end of the calendar year, something like that.
Okay. Any other comments from board members? Okay, I think staff, you have your direction. At this point, we will see you for a status report on these issues October 6th. And I want to thank all of you in law enforcement here today, brought this to our attention. I have Mr. Huckleberry has indicated that and we don't have anybody here representing corrections, that the issues are easily resolvable, some of the technical issues with corrections officers using desktops. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that assertion unless unless this board has communication with corrections to make sure that statement accurately reflects the situation. I know Mr. Huckleberry certainly believes it does, but I'm not sure that dialogue, and I think Supervisor Valadez has already indicated that dialogue has sufficiently occurred. So you've got your direction at this point, so unless there are any questions from Central Admin, we'll see you back here with a status report on October 6th.